It's everyone's favorite tournament of the year. The golfers are in Augusta, Georgia to compete for the coveted jacket. And DraftKings, the leader in one-day fantasy sports, is putting you in the center of the action by giving you a shot to land at the green. This week, DraftKings is giving you a free shot at the $1 million top prize when you download and sign up using promo code TBPN. If you haven't tried DraftKings, this is the time. It's easy to play. Pick 6 golfers, stay under the salary cap, and submit your lineup before the tournament tees off early Thursday morning. Then sit back and follow the action. The more red numbers they have on the leaderboard, the closer you'll be to winning some green. Rack up points for pars, birdies, finishing position, and more. Even though you may not be able to hit the course with the pros, DraftKings is giving you the chance to scratch your competitive itch and reign supreme. Download the DraftKings app now and use promo code TBPN during signup. This week, DraftKings is putting you in the action with a free shot at the $1 million top prize. That's code TBPN, and you can get a free shot at the $1 million top prize only at DraftKings. Minimum $5 deposit required. Eligibility restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com for details. You're listening to Spurscast, episode 605. My name is Paul Garcia, and I'm your host here on the Spurscast. Today I'll be going solo for this episode. On this episode, I'll be discussing the Spurs' play in the last 4 games, the team waiving Marquese Chriss and signing Gorgui Dieng for the rest of the season. Looking at how much of a factor fatigue is in these games for the Spurs lately, for March and early on in April, and then also Keldon Johnson's play on offense lately in these last 10 games. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right into this episode. Let's go ahead and go right into the latest news for the team. Okay, so since I last recorded a week ago with Michael DeLeon, the Spurs went 2-2 in their last 4 games. So, 500 ball these last 4 games. So let's go back to Saturday. So the Spurs, built a pretty big lead against the Chicago Bulls. They led by 36 points. The Bulls kind of, fought back a little bit in the second half, but in the end, the Spurs got a comfortable win by 16 points. Then on Monday, the Spurs were hosting the Sacramento Kings. They fell behind by 19 points in this game, and they ended up losing by 17 points. One thing to note is that the Kings shot very well from 3 in this game. Then the opposite happened on Wednesday. The Spurs again played the Kings in San Antonio. The Spurs actually were the ones who led by 23 in this game, and they ended up winning against the Kings by 14 points. And one thing to note there is that the Kings really struggled from 3 in this game, despite getting the same exact amount of wide open threes in both games. They got 18 attempts in each of those games from wide open 3, the Kings. And in one game on Monday, they made them all, made the majority of them. And then the second game, they couldn't make them. And so that was a huge difference. And San Antonio, I should also note, shot better from 3 on their end in compared to Monday to Wednesday. And then lastly on Thursday, the Spurs had a back-to-back with the Atlanta Hawks. The Hawks came to town. The Spurs trailed by 11 in the third quarter, but they fought back. They forced overtime. Then in the first overtime period, both teams only scored 9 points, so that sent the game to a second overtime. And in this one, the Spurs did end up losing at the end of the day by 5 points. Trae Young really played well in those 2 overtime periods for Atlanta, even though he struggled for most of the game in the first 3 quarters. And despite the fact that he had 5 fouls that he was working with going into the overtime period. So yeah, the Spurs did make that comeback, fought back a little bit, but they couldn't overcome the Hawks, and they ended up losing by 5 in double OT. So again, 500 week for the Spurs. They were favored barely in all these 4 games, because these are teams that are all below 500 in the Bulls, the Kings, and the Hawks. The Spurs, pretty much leave off in the standings where we had last discussed a week ago. They're now 24-22 by record. They're 8th out west, still in play for that play-in game whenever the season ends. As of right now, they're slightly got better on offense in terms of rankings. They went from 21st a week ago to now 20th on offense, and then they're 10th on defense. So they kind of remained 10th on defense. They haven't really moved from there. And then they have just 36% of their season left, with of these games remaining. Let's go to our second item here on the news list. The Spurs did make some roster moves. They waived Marquese Chriss recently this past week, and also they signed Gorgui Dieng However, we're going to talk about how Gorgui Dieng got injured in his first game that he played with the Spurs. So let's go back to Sunday. The Spurs announced that they had waived Marquese Chriss, who had $1.8 million left on his contract, so that'll pretty much stay on the books, and then he was going to be an unrestricted free agent, so there'll be no cap impact. He won't have any kind of cap hold on the salary sheet this coming off season. We already knew that Chriss was out for the rest of the season with a leg injury, so there was no chance that he was going to play in this current season. Then let's go to Monday. The Spurs announced that they had signed 6'10" big man Gorgui Dieng. According to Bobby Marks and also Basketball Insiders, Dieng got $1 million out of the Spurs' MLE for the rest of the season, so he will get paid $1 million. Then this offseason they'll have a cap hold on him where they can try to re-sign him with non-bird rights. If they wanted to, he will be an unrestricted free agent. So again, Gorgui Dieng lands on the team for the rest of the season. So Wednesday, Dieng actually got his first minutes with the Spurs, but he got hurt 6 minutes into checking into the game. He came off the bench, kind of replacing Jakob Poeltl there, and he went up for a shot attempt, and he drew a free throw, but Chimezie Metu, former Spur, kind of jumped on, kind of landed on his shoulder a little bit awkwardly, and so after taking the free throw and playing a few minutes, Dieng went out of the game, and then he basically was rolled out for the rest of the game. Then on Thursday, before the game against the Hawks, Coach Pop says that he was kind of just giving a guess of a ballpark a number of days that Dieng could be out. He said he thinks he might be out for about a week. So again, Dieng is signed to the team. It looks like he's going to take Drew Eubanks' minutes there in the as the backup 5 behind Jakob Poeltl, based on when Pop gave him some minutes. But for now, he is going to be out for about a week, it looks like, in the lineup. What does Dieng bring to the team? Well, with Memphis in just 22 games and 371 minutes, here's what he was doing. His offensive shot profile, 44% of his shots came from 3, so we know that he stretches the floor for a big man. 40% of his shots come in the paint, and then just 16% of his shots come from mid-range. What was he bringing on defense with Memphis in those few games that he played? He was very active in his numbers and deflections, steals, contested shots, blocks, and defensive rebounds. So he's going to bring a little bit of those elements to the Spurs if he continues with that production that he was providing to Memphis. And we know that he fouls a bit much. That was one little concerning number there, was his fouling in those few minutes. Again, 371 with Memphis. So again, that's kind of what he's going to bring to the floor. That I think the one part that he brings to the floor that Drew Eubanks kind of wasn't bringing was the fact that he stretches the floor from the outside. We've seen that defenses, like we talked about the last 2 episodes here on the Spurscast, defenses, if you just push pause on the Spurs game against a pretty good defense, they have to be ranked, I'd say, like league average to top 10 in that area. And if you watch those kind of defenses, they purposely, wall off the paint for the Spurs. They really try to play a lot more zone, or just kind of keeping three front court players inside, kind of manning the paint, trying to limit the Spurs' drives, and because that's one of the ways that the Spurs excel on offense, is to get drives in the paint, to kick out to 3-point shooters, or to try to draw fouls. And if you can take away the paint, well, then that just leaves the Spurs having to rely on their mid-range jumpers and their 3-point shots. And we know that a lot of their shooters aren't very efficient from 3 right now on this team, like we discussed last week in detail. So that's kind of what defenses do. And so Dieng helps out in that department, because we know that defenses, that Jakob Poeltl and Drew Eubanks don't stretch out to the 3-point line at all. So that's going to give the Spurs another big man to kind of play more 5-out type of offense, and kind of just keep the paint more open if they can. Some players can get those drives, because Dieng is a pretty good shooter from 3 based on the numbers again from this season. So that's kind of what Dieng will bring, and why it looks like right now he would get Drew Eubanks' minutes there off of the bench. Move on to our third topic, and that's to kind of keep an eye on Cam Reynolds. I know that he's currently on that 10-day contract. It does expire on Sunday, April 4th, so that's something to watch. Is the Spurs have three ways that they can handle what to do next once Cam's 10-day contract expires. They can option 1 is they can just sign him to another 10-day contract, so they can do that. They're allowed to do 2 10-day contracts in the season. Then after that, they either have to let the player go or try to re-sign him to a rest of the season deal. So again, after Sunday, there might be an open roster spot if they don't re-sign Reynolds to another 10-day. They can let the contract expire. So again, after 10 days, he can become an unrestricted free agent. They have a 15th spot open if they want to sign someone else, or they just want to re-sign Reynolds. And then, like I mentioned a while ago, the last thing they can do is just sign him for the rest of the season if they wanted to. We have seen Cam play some minutes here. He's played just very minimal minutes in 3 of the last 4 games. And again, it's mainly because of the deficits, whether the Spurs won by a lot or whether the other team was winning by a lot. Coach Pop will usually put him in like the last 2 minutes of a game, and he'll just get some run there along with like Lucas Šimanić and Trey Jones. So again, it's not that he's been getting actual minutes in the rotation, because Lonnie Walker's been out with the injury. So instead, it's just been with the wrist injury, should I say, for Lonnie. But it's more so just been to have some depth there in the event that a game's pretty much settled in the fourth quarter. Coach Pop has an option to put another player in there, such as Reynolds. That's where he's kind of been getting his minutes. And then we do want to note that Lonnie, it looks like he's going to be coming back pretty soon here. We know that he's missed 6 games in a row as of that Hawks game, but he was, before that Hawks game took place, he was listed as probable in one of these earlier games. So that's a sign that Lonnie could be coming back pretty soon after missing 6 games with the Spurs. So again, kind of just keep an eye out on Cam Reynolds and see what the team decides to do with that 15th roster spot with his 10-day contract expiring here on Sunday, April 4th. All right, the next topic I want to talk about, and this is kind of a tough one to kind of, just because we don't have the as public in the public, we don't have the information that the teams have. We know that the teams have all these different health metrics and different kind of data that they have with their team medical staff that kind of monitors players and their minutes played and just all the kind of things that they have, and that's what really makes a big impact on whether or not players sit out games or whether or not how the minutes are structured on the team. And so again, that data is not really made available publicly to us, all that advanced info that the teams have. But what we do have is just some minor type of data out there in terms of distance and speed. And so that's kind of what I wanted to look at, is because I really do, we have noted that, the Spurs do have a grueling schedule here in the second half of the season, where, just because, they really don't have a day off anymore, ever since the All-Star break was over. They really don't have consecutive days off, should I say. They do get a day off, but they have so many back-to-backs. They have a game pretty much every other night. Derek White was talking about after the game against the Hawks, how it just feels like there's a game every single day, and you just have to mentally kind of reset your mind that here's another game, here's a new opponent. And so there is some sort of, I just wanted to look at, what is the distance and speed metrics. That's the closest I can find in terms of looking, trying to gauge whether or not fatigue's really playing an impact in the season. And I want to see what do these metrics show. So there is a little bit of a story here from what I can tell here. I pulled up the Spurs pre-All-Star break miles per game. So this is distance and miles per game that they run in a game. And then I pulled up their post-All-Star break miles in a game. So again, this is pretty much all of March, and then that first game in April. And so I do see a decrease. I'm going to put this on Twitter. I'll put it on my Twitter, Paul Garcia NBA, if you want to look at this and really dissect this data. And so we do see that, and just looking at the 10 rotation players. So when I say 10 rotation players, we're talking about DeMar DeRozan, DeJounte Murray, Keldon Johnson, Lonnie Walker IV, Patty Mills, Jakob Poeltl, Derek White, Rudy Gay, Devin Vassell, and Drew Eubanks. So when I look at this data of how the players were how much distance they were covering pre-All-Star break and post-All-Star break, pretty much everyone has seen a decline in terms of the miles they're running in a game, except for 3 players. Jakob Poeltl has seen his miles in a game increase from 1.83 miles per game to 2.06. Derek White has seen 1.75 miles to now 2.22 miles in a game, and then Drew Eubanks 0.94 to 1.07. So there's a little, and then everyone else in terms of those rotation players has seen a decrease in the amount of area on the floor that they're covering in a game that they're running. And so there's a little bit of story here for these 3 players. We know that Jakob, in the beginning of the season, he wasn't the starting 5. LaMarcus Aldridge still was. And then as Aldridge was hurt, and then, he started coming off the bench until he got waived recently, Jakob eventually became the starting big. So there's a little bit of a story there for Jakob, why his distances has expanded, just because, again, he's playing more minutes. He's the focal point in terms of the backup 5 position. Then Derek White, same thing. We know that he was dealing with injuries pretty much the entire first half of the season. He finally started coming back here in February, and so we've seen his increase in terms of miles played starting to expand as well. And also we know that Derek became the starting 2, right after he came back after a few games. And then same thing for Drew Eubanks. He was kind of, there was games where he wasn't playing at all, and then all of a sudden, we know that he also had to deal with COVID, where he was out for a while. And then as Aldridge was gone, he kind of became that backup 5 to Jakob Poeltl. And so we've seen also Drew's coverage kind of start to expand. But again, like I mentioned, DeRozan, we've seen a decrease in the amount of space that he covers when on the floor in terms of running miles per game. DeJounte Murray, Keldon Johnson, Lonnie Walker, Patty Mills, Rudy Gay, and Devin Vassell. So all those players have seen a decrease. Then we can look at the average speed that the players run in terms of miles per game. And there's a very similar story here where a lot of the players we've seen from pre-All-Star break to post-All-Star break, their miles per game, how fast they run in the game, the speed, it has decreased for all but 2 players. And those 2 players are Keldon Johnson. He went from pre-All-Star break running 4.28 miles per hour in a game to 4.29, so just a 0.1 increase. Then Derek White went from 4.16 to 4.20. So again, a little bit of an increase for Derek, and we know that, like I mentioned, he's playing more minutes. So it's interesting because I'm going to talk about Keldon in a bit, that he's actually running a lot faster, just barely though, post All-Star break, despite some of the struggles that we've seen from him on his end on offense. And so we do see, though, from all the other players, they have gotten they're not running as fast in the game in the second part of the season here in post All-Star break. So it's hard to quantify exactly how much of a factor fatigue is playing, but this is the closest I could do in terms of finding some sort of data that shows, just how much distance is the team covering, how much speed, how fast are the players running. And like I mentioned, across the board, we're seeing decreases in speed per game from DeRozan, DeJounte Murray, Lonnie Walker, Patty Mills, Jakob Poeltl, who else here? Rudy Gay, Devin Vassell, and then even Drew Eubanks has seen a small reduction in speed. So there is some sort of right now, if everything was green where everyone's just playing faster or covering more miles per game, we could say that, okay, maybe, or it was kind of like right at the exact amount, we could say, okay, so the fatigue really isn't a factor. But I think that now that we see some of this data, it is a bit of a concerning trend to watch, especially because there's really no break coming for this team until the playoffs get here. There's no consecutive days off. They're always going to either have a back-to-back or just one day off in between games, and so they've just got to kind of just continue to slog through it. And this is something that Coach Pop mentioned, after the game. The Spurs did lose to the Hawks in that double overtime game, but he says, he was kind of proud of the guys of how they fought back, how they just didn't give up despite three games of 4 nights. So Coach Pop, you can just tell based on his post game comments that he understands that even though they're losing games here and there, he knows like it's not really it's hard for them because one part is like they're not getting the days off, they're really struggling with this fatigue, and then part 2 is that they just haven't had any practice time because they can't have a practice with no consecutive days off. So they can't even really work on their mistakes that they're having in these games on offense and defense because there's just no practice time allowed. And the only thing to take back is that pretty much the entire league is like this for a lot of the teams that had to have games canceled early on in the first half of the season. They're having a tough time here in the second half of the season in terms of the amount of games they have to play because of they're trying to recapture and make it to the 72 full games here for the year. So again, we'll kind of see what happens with the Spurs and whether or not they can start putting a winning streak together or how much this fatigue will continue to impact them. But I do think that you can say in a way that fatigue is kind of impacting this team based on some of these data that we're seeing with the distance covered per game and also the average speed of the players in these games. The last topic is Keldon Johnson's play in these last 10 games. Especially on offense, defensively, he his numbers have kind of been the same where he's kind of playing out of position where he's 6'6" or 6'5", whatever, height you're looking at on different websites, and so he's kind of always having to play guard the four. So we know that on defense, he struggles a little bit just because he's having to play out of positions. But we did notice, early on in the season how on offense he was really being a force in the paint, just attacking defenses nonstop, also getting to the free throw line, and he would only take a 3 if he really had to in a possession. But we've noticed how defenses have really changed their way of guarding him, and teams share tape or they see what the other not share tape, but they watch what other defenses did the games prior. So when they do their scouting on players, and so this is an interesting comment by Derek White the other just recently after the Atlanta game. Derek had a quote when he was asked about Keldon's play, his slump lately on offense, and he just said, Derek White said, the league kind of figures you out, and you've just got to make adjustments. So that was Derek thinks that Keldon will eventually figure it out. He knows that right now the defenses, if you can just push pause on any offensive possession, and you're going to see that like I mentioned, really good defenses that are usually around number 1 through like 15. They're pretty good about just walling off the paint for Keldon. They really keep about 3 or 4 feet away from him, whether he's on the ball or even off the ball. So they're just daring him to shoot, whether it's daring him to take mid-rangers, which he doesn't take at all, which is a good thing because you don't want him taking those non-efficient shots. But the 3-point shot, they're just completely leaving him open. When we look at the rotation players on the Spurs, Keldon takes the most of his threes that are wide open on the team in terms of rotation players. So 70% of his threes are attempted wide wide open. So again, this is telling you defenses are completely leaving him open, daring him to shoot. And we know that the reason why they do that is because it's paying off on their end, on defensive end, because they see that Keldon only shoots 33% on wide open threes and 32% overall from threes. So we do know, we do see that he struggles there from that wide open three. And if you're not shooting over 40%, and it's not just Keldon, should I say, we talked about this last week with Michael DeLeon, it's pretty much the majority of the Spurs players shoot below 40% on wide open threes, except for Rudy Gay, Lonnie Walker, and Patty Mills. Those are the only three players on the Spurs right now that really scare the defense, where they think that they see them as a threat. And this reminds me of the Hawks game. The Hawks were playing a lot of what it looked like 2-3 zone defense against the Spurs, where they constantly wanted to keep their three rotation players inside the paint to kind of wall it off and not let the Spurs get in there. And so what does that show? That shows that the only player that they were really sticking close to was Patty Mills. When the Spurs were on offense, they were kind of leaving a lot of those players, the other players, open. And I know that Derek White had a great game in this game where he made 7 threes, but if you look at Derek's wide open 3-point percentage coming into that game, he also was struggling a little bit. So if Derek starts to get his 3-point shot better, which I think he's at 35% right now as I'm recording this, as he starts to get his 3-point shot more consistent and gets out of his shooting slump, and this might be the case because he's been knocking down a bunch of threes in these last few games, well, then I think Derek's going to become finally that fourth threat from three where defenses are more worried about him. So again, the Spurs would have Lonnie Walker, Patty Mills, Derek White, and Rudy Gay as their respectable 3-point shooters, where defenses will not want to back off them. But for now, Keldon's in that group of like DeJounte Murray and Jakob Poeltl, DeMar DeRozan, Drew Eubanks, the players that the defense isn't worried about from three. They're going to leave them wide open. They're going to give them about 2 or 3 feet of space and just try to force them to take mid-range jumpers or threes and really try to take away the paint from those players, because that's where those players are most effective. And so we've really seen this with Keldon, where in the last 10 games, one of his strengths this season is just kind of scoring in the paint, kind of just getting into the teeth of the defense in the paint and getting a lot of shots there and makes, and then also, drawing fouls. And we haven't seen that in these last 10 games, where he's only gotten to the paint 3 times. Gotten 10 points from the paint, should I say. Again, 10 points in the paint in just 3 games out of his last 10 that he's played in. And so those teams that he did that against were the Cavs, the Chicago Bulls, and the Milwaukee Bucks. So again, out of those 3 teams, the only team that's pretty, that's a good defensive team there is the Milwaukee Bucks. So he was able to do that against 2 of the teams that struggle from defense. And so again, that's just kind of something to watch, is that he, like Derek said, the league has seen the scouting report on Keldon. It's wall off the paint from him. Don't let him take any shots inside. Try to keep him out of the paint, and you'll have a good chance of kind of limiting his effectiveness on offense. And so we saw that just recently, where he had just 5 points against the Atlanta Hawks, and then he had a game where he had like 7 points or 9 points. So again, as long as they're continuing to force him to either take the 3 or maybe look at the mid-range jumper, that's a win for the defense on their end. And so we'll see what Keldon can do and what the Spurs can do as well, scheme-wise, to try to get him a little bit more involved and get him better shots near his area of strength, which is the paint. I think one thing we've seen is when they can get out of the break by creating possessions on defense where they create steals or blocks and things like that, they can get Keldon going out on the break, and that's a good way to get him some paint points, because in the half court right now it's a bit tough for him. So again, we'll kind of see what happens with Keldon and how and how he's able to kind of adjust and get back to the level of play on offense that he was performing with, or whether or not maybe a lineup change needs to happen, because it's just too much where every defense is kind of doing the same thing and backing off the paint. Backing off the 3-point line and the mid range for him, and so maybe the Spurs need to get some more shooting in the starting lineup if that's the case. So again, we'll kind of just see what happens with Keldon going forward and see if he can get out of that slump. But it is just interesting to mention, just because of what Derek White mentioned, and Coach Pop did mention that he didn't think that physically there was anything going on with Keldon in terms of like fatigue, if it was really impacting him. And like I mentioned, he was actually one of the players out of that data that I was talking about in speed per game. He was actually one of the few players that was actually playing faster than pre-All-Star breaks. So again, we'll kind of just see what happens with Keldon. All right, so before we wrap up, I just wanted to remind you to visit ProjectSpurs.com if you have some time. Steven Anderson continues to keep you prepared for. He continues to analyze the Spurs and their games each night with his recaps and analysis. Benjamin Bornstein's getting ready for the draft here with his latest prospect watch over Isaiah Livers by Ben Bornstein. We have a new writer, Rocky Garza Jr. His latest piece is called San Antonio Spurs Fans Should Be Ready to Experience the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly at Times. And then also Colin Reed continues to work on those Project Spurs audio extra pieces. And the latest one is why the Aldridge buyout was beneficial for both sides, for the Spurs and the Brooklyn Nets. And again, you can listen to those on projectspurs.com. You can also go to YouTube, and Colin now has those in video format as well. So again, those are pretty interesting pieces that Colin's been creating lately. So again, so thanks again for listening here on the Spurscast, and also thank you to Michael DeLeon for mixing and producing this episode. From all of us at Project Spurs, stay safe and have a great day.